My Weirder School, Book Number 2. Mr. Harrison is Embarrassing. Written by Dan Gutman. Pictures by Jim Pelot. Chapter 7. The Weirdest Thing in the History of the World. We wanted to ask Mr. Harrison if he was one of the Beatles, but there was no time. We had to rush to the all-purpose room for the big birthday celebration. I was right behind Alexia. When we got there, a giant cake was on the stage. I mean giant. There must have been enough cake for everybody in the whole school to have a piece. And it was covered with candles. I guess there were 90 of them for Elementary's birthday. Mr. Harrison went up on stage and started lighting them. I saw Mayor Hubble talking to Mr. Klutz at the front of the room. Some guys were carrying around a big TV camera. I didn't see Elementary anywhere. Before we could sit down, a lady I never saw before grabbed me by the arm. She was wearing a hat that said "Press" on it, and she pulled out a pad and a pen. "My name is Mrs. Lilly," she said. "I work for the News Tribune Bulletin Inquirer. Can I ask you kids a few questions?" "Sure," Alexia and I replied. "So what is your name, young man?" Mrs. Lilly asked. "My name is AJ, and I hate school," I told her. "Hello, little girl," Mrs. Lilly said. "What's your name?" "My name is AJ, and I hate school," said Alexia. "Both of you are named AJ?" Mrs. Lilly asked us. "Yes." "And both of you hate school?" "Yes." "Tell me why," she said. "I need to get a scoop for my paper." "Why do you need a scoop?" I asked. "Did your dog make a poop?" "No, I mean I'm here to get the real story about elementary school," Mrs. Lilly said. "I want the story behind the story." "Well, the teachers here are all crazy," Alexia told her. "Is that so?" Mrs. Lilly said as she jotted down notes in her pad. "Tell me more." "Our teacher, Mr. Granite, is from another planet," I told her. "He built a spaceship powered by potatoes so he could go home. But a cow bumped into it and it crashed into the playground." "Interesting," said Mrs. Lilly, writing quickly on her pad. "Hey, can we press on your hat?" Alexia asked Mrs. Lilly. "Why do you want to press on my hat?" "Because it says press on it," I told her. "Duh." Mrs. Lilly is silly. She wanted to ask us more questions, but Mr. Klutz made a peace sign, so everybody had to shut up. "Take a seat, AJ," he said. "I can't," I said. "All the seats are screwed to the floor." "He means sit down," Alexia told me. I knew that. "Some people might say elementary school is old," Mr. Klutz announced into the microphone. "Some people say it's falling apart. Not me. Our school has character, blah, blah, blah. And our school has history, blah, blah, blah. And our school has blah, 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 blah." Mr. Klutz's speech was really boring. Then Mayor Hubble got up to speak. "Blah, blah, blah, blah," he said. "Blah, blah, 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 blah." I thought I was gonna die. And now I would like to introduce our honored guest of the day, the mayor said, the namesake of elementary school, Mrs. Ella Menchie. Mrs. Menchie is really old, and she came toddling out on the stage with a cane. That lady is tiny. She was about the size of R2-D2 in Star Wars. Mr. Klutz adjusted the microphone so Ella Menchie could reach it. I'm so happy your school was named after me, Mrs. Menchie told us. Because when you get to be my age, you forget things. And if I ever forget my name, I know that all I need to do is walk down the street and see it in big letters on the side of your school. We weren't sure if Ella Menchie was making a joke or not. Maybe she really does have to walk by our school to remember her name. We all laughed just to be on the safe side. You say it's your birthday, Ella Menchie said. It's my birthday too. Everybody cheered. She went behind the giant birthday cake and started to sing Happy Birthday. The whole school joined in. It was loud. When the song was over, Mrs. Menchie started to blow out the candles. There were like 1,100,000 of them. I thought she was gonna pass out. Ella Menchie was in the middle of blowing out the candles when the weirdest thing in the history of the world happened. I'm not going to tell you what it was. Okay, I'll tell you. All the lights went out. Chapter 8. Freaking Out. Suddenly, we were all sitting there in the dark. The only light was coming from the candles on Ella Menchie's birthday cake. For a few seconds, nobody knew what to do. It was scary. Everyone remain calm, said Mr. Klutz. The lights in the halls are out too, hollered Mr. Mackey. The computers in the front office are down, shouted Mrs. Patty from the back of the all-purpose room. Everything is down, said one of the other teachers. It's a total power failure. A blackout, said Mayor Hubble. Oh no, when the parents find out, they'll blame it on me, and I won't be re-elected. Why is it that every time I come to visit your school, something bad happens? Asked Ella Menchie. I've had enough of this. I'm sure the lights will come back on any second, Mrs. Menchie, said Mr. Klutz. Let's not panic, said Mrs. Jaffe. I'm afraid of the dark, whined one of the first graders. I want my mommy, yelled some other little kid. Sheesh, get a grip. It was like the first graders had never been in the dark before. Those kids should take a chill pill. The only problem was that as soon as one of those little first-grade munchkins starts in crying, all the rest of the first graders started crying too. And once all the first graders started crying, the second graders start yelling and screaming. And once all the second graders start yelling and screaming, the third graders start freaking out. The world is coming to an end, shouted Michael. Run for your life, shouted Ryan. We're all going to die, I shouted, just for the fun of it. Mr. Klutz was probably making the shut up peace sign with his fingers, but nobody could see it because it was too dark. Mrs. Menchie, are you okay? Mr. Klutz shouted. No reply. Mrs. Menchie! Silence. You could hear the pin drop in there. Mrs. Menchie, where are you? Asked Mayor Hubble. Nothing. Where's Mrs. Menchie? Yelled Mr. Klutz. Where's Mrs. Menchie? Yelled Mrs. Jaffe. Where's Mrs. Menchie? Yelled Mr. Granite. Where's Mrs. Menchie? Everybody was yelling. Mrs. Menchie was gone. Chapter 9. The Search Party. When all the kids realized that Ella Menchie was missing, they stopped crying and yelling and screaming and freaking out. Everybody was worried about Mrs. Menchie. I'm sure the lights will be back on any moment and we'll find Mrs. Menchie, said Mr. Klutz. For now, I need everyone to stay calm. Calm? Who can stay calm when all the lights are out and the 90-year-old lady the school is named after has disappeared? Ella, the teachers were all saying. Where are you, Mrs. Menchie? She was right here a minute ago, said Miss Coco, the gifted and talented teacher. I saw her standing there. Maybe she went to the bathroom, said Mr. Docker, the science teacher. Maybe she's hiding, suggested Mrs. Yonkers. Yoo-hoo, said Miss Laney. Mrs. Menchie, come out, wherever you are. This is a tragedy, said Mr. Klutz. How could you lose a 90-year-old lady? She's pretty tiny, said Mrs. Jaffe. She could be anywhere. We have to find her, said Mayor Hubble. If anything happens to Mrs. Menchie, the voters are going to blame me for it on Election Day. All the grown-ups were upset. Well, all the grown-ups were upset except for one. That newspaper reporter, Mrs. Lilly. Now I have a story, she said excitedly. I can see the headline. Ex-teacher Ella Menchie vanishes into thin air. Police are baffled. Finally, I'll have the scoop I've been waiting for my whole life. Why don't you just go to a store and buy a scoop? I asked. Mr. Herdison lit all the candles on the cake again. Now we could see a little. Mr. Klutz, he said, I think I know where Mrs. Menchie might be. Where? She may have wandered down to the basement, Mr. Herdison said. But to get to her, I'm going to need some little people. Why? Asked Mr. Klutz. I think she fell in a hole, said Mr. Herdison. She fell in a hole? Somebody yelled. She fell on a hoe? Somebody else yelled. She flew in a hotel? Somebody else yelled. Everybody was yelling out all kinds of crazy stuff that had nothing to do with falling in a hole. You say you need some little people, Mr. Klutz asked. How little? First graders and second graders might be too little, said Mr. Herdison. Fourth and fifth graders might be too big. I need some third graders. I volunteer, shouted Ryan, Michael, and Neil the nude kid. We do too, said me and Alexia. I want to help find Mrs. Menchie too, said Andrea, who always wants to help grown-ups so they'll like her. Then, of course, Emily volunteered because she does everything that Andrea does. Good, said Mr. Herdison. Each of you come up here and take a piece of cake with a candle on it. We'll use the candles to light our way until the lights come back on. You won't see me." "We get to have cake?" said Ryan, who is always thinking about eating. "Cool. Follow me, kids," said Mr. Harrison.